Welcome to stage 5 of our 7-stage system for generating high quality business leads on LinkedIn. Now, in this video, if you're already using LinkedIn to generate leads or you've done it in the past, this is a video where we're going to be going over everything you need to know in order to minimize your time, stay consistent, scale, and improve your ROI through good systems and good process. So this video is for you if it's taking you too long to do everything at the moment, you're having trouble tracking and staying consistent, all the work that you're doing on the platforms, or you're worried about getting restricted if you use automation or different tools, and how to actually keep your account safe and secure. More specifically, we'll cover what the process looks like at scale, CRMs to manage your processes on LinkedIn, how to use automation to help you manage everything, keeping your account secure, how to minimize your manual processes, and capturing stats and updating your CRMs automatically. Super quick intro for anyone who hasn't seen any of the other videos in the series. My name is Ryan Caswell. I'm the founder here at b2bleads.com. We've run thousands of campaigns across LinkedIn and helped hundreds of clients all over the world grow their business with more predictable lead generation systems and processes. Process is one of my favorite parts of this series because a good process is really the difference between not making any money or making a buttload of money. And I'm really excited to share what we've learned with you today. All right, so let's first talk about what the process actually looks like and start to dissect why this becomes an issue at scale. So if you remember from our previous videos, we talk about the simple message sequence that we use to reach out to people to start conversations. So we basically, if we look at our simple process, it really comes down to we want to connect with someone, we want to engage with that person, start a conversation, we want to nurture that conversation through to a booked call, and then that person will eventually and ideally become a client. So let's look at the example of our 4-drip message sequence that we talked about previously. So it was really a connect message, and then we had once the person had, so it's an invitation to connect, and once the person had connect, we would send message 1, and then we would send message 2, and then if we still didn't get a response, we would send message 3. So all up 4 messages here. So that's pretty simple at the moment. So when you reach out to invite someone to connect, you can't really send this second message to them that's going to contain like the meat and bones of what you actually want to say, and your connection message is fairly limited. So you got to connect with someone, and then we need to wait until that person connects before we can send the next message. So that can take anywhere from 1 day through to essentially infinity. So we'll put here, let's say it takes 1 week. Once that person connects, we then send that first message to them, and let's say they don't respond. So then we wait another week. You need to check if they have replied or not. If they still haven't replied, then you send that message, and then you wait another, let's say 2 weeks. So this is just obviously the example, the timing that we talk about in our 4-drip message sequence. It doesn't have to be this. This is just something that we've used for years and years and years. It's tried and tested, and we know it works. So that's an example, and then let's say they actually reply here. Then what happens is you'll see that reply, and then you'll reply back to that person. So let's come back up here, reply back. Now that person may, like a conversation is obviously back and forth. Now let's say there's been a few back and forth replies, you're trying to get this person onto a call, and you've sent the last message, and now you haven't heard back from them. Perhaps you need to wait, you've sent a message, you haven't heard anything back. You might wait a week, give them a chance to actually reply, and then you might actually have to reply back again. I know this is a bit tedious, but I'm building up to something. So you reply back again, you haven't heard anything back again, you wait another week, reply back, wait another maybe 3 days, and let's say they actually reply. You start another conversation, you're trying to get them back onto that booked call, and then you're back in this loop here where you're following them up, and so on and so forth. This is just a sequence for one specific person on LinkedIn. Now imagine doing this 200 times a week, and all of these are going to have different times of which you need to follow people up. They're going to be at different stages in the journey. And you can just see how this becomes such a cluster nightmare very, very, very quickly as soon as you want to get some scale. And you do need to get scale in order for this to work. Now, if you've ever had trouble staying consistent on LinkedIn, it's for this very reason. It's because at its core, it's not particularly difficult. You're just having a conversation with someone. But everyone's going to be at different points in the conversation. What you say depends on where that person is at that point in the conversation. And this is why it becomes critical for using the specific tools and automation to help A, manage the process that doesn't require you to do it manually, and B, to track everything so you know exactly what you need to do and when without having to use any brain power, because this stuff can be done quite simply using tools, automation, systems, and process. And so this is what we're going to be talking about in more detail, is the ways that you can do that. So if you do want to do this manually, and it is absolutely possible if you don't want to use any of the tools and systems, you just need to take into account that you need to get a higher ROI in order to account for the extra time that you're going to put into it. And you just need to, like, ultimately, I would suggest using something like a spreadsheet to track all the different stages each person is in. So each row would correspond to a different person, and then each thing would correspond, each column would correspond to a different action. So it might be connected, first reply, second reply, and so forth. And then you would have to work through sequentially each day and check each person where they're at. You also need to consider people who haven't connected. You need to withdraw those invites as well. So like, you can do it, I just wouldn't recommend it. I've done it in the past. It's not fun. So this is here to really help identify or highlight the importance of having good processes and systems, because it's just a nightmare to manage and there's no extra benefit to doing it manually. All right, now before we get too much into the actual automation and the different tools that you can use to manage the automation, I wanted to talk a little bit about CRMs. We often get asked what CRM we use, whether we can integrate our process with their CRMs, and a lot of things around that. So first I want to talk about what's the importance of a CRM? Why do we actually need one? So I just talked about how complex this gets at scale, even such a simple thing like just a back and forth conversation with two people. Well, CRM is going to help manage that complex thing at scale and tell you, basically give you the information about when you need to take the next action and when. So it helps you prioritize your actions and your priorities with respect to lead generation and reaching out to people and booking calls. So having a CRM is really critical, but where I think a lot of people actually go wrong when it comes to CRMs is they overcomplicate this or get tools that are way too overpowered for the actual job. So we've tested out a lot of different ways to manage this process with LinkedIn. Tested tools like Airtable, HubSpot, Go High Level, and ultimately, after years and years of testing, we keep coming back to tried and true Google Sheets. So the reason we use Google Sheets is because it does everything we need to do. It's incredibly powerful. It manages vast amounts of data really effectively, and it's completely free. So there was really no reason to actually move to these other more overpowered platforms that do all these things that we didn't need, because ultimately Google Sheets did everything we needed to do better than all the other platforms did, was free, everyone knows how to use it, it's incredibly powerful, flexible, you can do a lot with it, and great for like presenting data in a meaningful way. So it's really interesting, and a lot of people find that quite interesting, that we talk about spreadsheets as a way to actually manage the data and use it as a CRM. And I just really want to highlight that there's really no point introducing complexity where it's not needed, because as you know, at scale, simple things become complex and complex things become a nightmare. So you don't have to use Google Sheets to manage this. What I'm going to talk about now is what you actually want to capture in your CRM when it comes to managing the process, and then that way you can apply this process to any CRM that you want to use. All right, let's get into this. So when it comes to actually what we want to know, when you think about what you actually want to track, think about it in terms of each particular contact or person that you reach out to on LinkedIn. And I guess the three key things that you want to know about that particular person is, first of all, having a link, or the things that you want to capture is a link to that person's profile. You want to have a status that will dictate, what action you need to take or when you need to take that action. And then you want a date for when that next action needs to be taken. that's really as complex as it needs to be. Now you can certainly capture a lot more information. You can capture what the campaign name is, you can capture all the job titles and company name, and a whole bunch of different things that can be useful for statistics and data analysis. But ultimately, these are the three key things that you need to capture, and everything else is really going to be found on that person's LinkedIn profile. So that's going to be the source of truth, and anything you add here could potentially go out of date once they change their profile. So these are the three key things I just want to make sure that you are capturing if you are going to run a process on LinkedIn to reach out to prospects. You want to make sure you capture this information. Other things that are useful to capture, especially when it comes to actually using the data in a meaningful way and analyzing and troubleshooting and improving, is you want to capture dates around when you invited the person, when that person was connected, or if they didn't connected, when they were withdrawn, when the invitation was withdrawn and didn't fit in the box here, or ultimately the date of the last reply from that person. And just with those 4 dates alone, you can really track everything that you need to, and we'll talk about that in the next video, in order to troubleshoot your campaign to see where things are working or where things may need a little bit more assistance. And you can see this works perfectly for a spreadsheet, but if you're using a CRM that you want to use, the only downside I say to using certain CRMs, let's say HubSpot, is they tend to charge by contacts that you have. And so a lot of times when you're reaching out and you're trying to nurture conversations through outbound, a lot of those conversations are not particularly valuable. They're sort of no, not at the moment. They may not be a perfect fit. And if you're capturing all of those contacts into your CRM and you're paying on a pay per contact basis, you're quickly going to, I'll say, pollute's probably the wrong word, but pollute your CRM with a lot of contacts and details that are not particularly relevant here. And so a lot of times when we work with our client, we have our CRM for managing replies on LinkedIn, and it's a platform like Google Sheets that you don't have to pay per extra line that you add or extra row or bit of data. And then when clients get to the point where, or prospects get to the point where they're actually booking calls, that would move to what we would call the client CRM or an actual sales CRM. So you can manage more data here and then move it here for email management and automation and other things there. But if you have this data here, you can use a CRM system like this. And finally, like I said previously, you can do all this manually. Otherwise, you can use automation platforms, and they'll use what's called a web hook, which we'll talk about in a minute. And basically that's the connection between these automation platforms and your CRM. And basically it'll send that information to there, and anything like invited, connected, withdrawn, all the information about the contacts can go into your CRM, whatever that may be. All right, now let's talk a little bit about automation and where automation actually fits into the process. So I've mentioned probably a number of times, like when we're reaching out to complete strangers on LinkedIn, there's kind of 3 parts that we need to achieve. First, we need to get that person to connect with us, and then we need that person to engage with us, so that being like a reply or some sort of action from the prospect, and then we need to nurture that reply through to a call. Now, automation probably, I'd say, really lives on the first 2 parts of that process, and the reason being is that it's such a defined part of the process. So if you're reaching out to someone who hasn't had any previous engagement with you, and you know, I guess, how you want to actually start that conversation or begin that engagement, it's a fairly consistent and scalable thing that you can use automation for. Once the conversation actually starts, this is where you actually need to manually take over, or potentially use platforms like AI to help manage that conversation, or delegate it to some other person in your team to help manage that conversation. Otherwise, it's just more nuanced beyond what you can do with just pure automation. So automation can really handle, I'd say, it's that 80-20 rule. You can really manage like 80% of the work with the automation and just jump in for that 20% that requires actual manual intervention. And so what I mean by automation platforms are tools like Expandy, Phantom Buster, Dripify, DuckSoup, Salesflow. These are all tools that basically you use them and you log into your LinkedIn profile with, and they can actually automate a lot of the and manage a lot of the actual activities that we talk about here in terms of sending messages, sending connections, managing and withdrawing invitations and things like that. So coming back to the sequence we talked about before, we got our 4 drip series of a message. So we want to connect, and then we want to send a series of messages, message 1, message 2, and message 3. And then we can actually see when that person has replied. And you know, before we drew out the whole rest of the process, we're having this back and forth conversation. So the automation can't actually handle that part of the process for you, but what it can do is handle this initial really like volume heavy part of the process. So these tools that I just mentioned before, you can basically set up a campaign, and in a campaign you define the sequence or the order of the messages that you want to send, and those messages need to be specific to the target market that you import. So then using your LinkedIn, you can then import contacts, so here, and then it'll send this series of messages to those people. It'll also track who has connected, who's been sent invites, who's been withdrawn, who has actually replied. When it sees that information, it can then send that information via, and we're going to talk about this again towards the end, these things called webhooks. And so what happens is the platform, so we'll talk about the automation platform. The automation will send this, and then you can set up webhooks, and these are a little technical. So if you're not super great with things like webhooks, you can go on platforms like Upwork, hire someone, you know, maybe $50 an hour, $50 in total. You'll get someone to actually set all this up depending on the automation platform you want to use, what you actually want to track, and connect it with the CRM you want. But essentially what's going to happen is the automation platform is going to conduct these actions. It's going to look for certain actions that are taken by your prospects, like invited, connections, withdrawals, replies. It then sends that information to via a webhook, and that webhook can be captured by platforms like Zapier or Make, Zapier.com I believe it is. And these platforms basically connect, they're like no-code platforms that connect to pretty much most other platforms available out there, and then that can send information to wherever you want it to go. You can get it to send you an email notification that something important has happened on LinkedIn. You can get it to send to a CRM. You can get it to do all manner of things. And we'll touch on what information we send to the CRM in order to track our statistics effectively. But that's essentially how the process works. And we use Make.com primarily because it's cheaper at higher volume, and it's pretty effective, but it's a little bit less user-friendly than Zapier. So if you're just getting started, you're not doing a huge amount of volume, managing, you know, hundreds of profiles at a time, then Zapier is going to be perfect for you. So when it comes to selecting your automation platform, there's probably 3 key things that you want to keep in mind. Now, if you want to, I guess, skip the guesswork and just use what we use SalesFlow. We've been using it for the past 5 years. It's very reliable, and that's what we've been using the whole time. Otherwise, you know, a lot of the other platforms, they're good as well. We've tested quite a number of them. There's still a few that we haven't tested. Ultimately, you just want something that's fairly reliable and fairly secure. So ultimately, you just want to make sure that whatever you're using has been around for a while and has good security in terms of, you know, keeping your account safe. And making sure that when you're using it on LinkedIn, LinkedIn's not going to freak out and say, what the hell are you doing? And we've never had any of those issues with SalesFlow. I'm sure a lot of them are fairly similar in that regard, but that's just what we've used in the past and can sort of recommend. So security is obviously a really important one. The other one is you want to make sure it can run on its own IP. So basically what that means is that you can select an IP that is from a location where you live or close to where you live, so it looks like the activity is coming from basically you still. And it also means that it can work in the background, run on its own. You don't have to open up a browser and have it running on your computer, which is just something that's likely to get missed. You just schedule it, it's going to work in the background, and it's safer as well than a lot of the browser the browser extensions, which can get picked up by LinkedIn and have caused issues as well with accounts getting restricted. At least they were in the past. I haven't seen anything recently, but I know it's been an issue in the past. And the last one is, as I keep mentioning, something that has webhooks. That way you can send any information and actions and activity from LinkedIn that are occurring, you can send that to a CRM and that data is your data now. Whereas if you keep it on these platforms or you keep it on LinkedIn, that's no longer your data, and you can't also use it in a meaningful way, export it to spreadsheets or data management platforms. Hey, so this video was recorded a little while back, and since then I've had a chance to speak with Salesflow, and they've been kind enough to offer 10% off anyone who wants to test it out. So I'll put a link below for anyone who wants to trial, and if you do end up signing up, you'll get a 10% discount ongoing for the life of the platform. Like I said, it's something that we've used for a really long time, nearly 10 years now. Found it really reliable. It's not the only platform out there in the market, but it is something that we use and recommend. So if you do want to try it out or use the link below, you'll get an ongoing 10% discount. Hope that helps. Back to the video. All right, so I just wanted to finish this part around automation, around a few other tips in order to keep your account secure and make sure you don't deal with any restrictions. So LinkedIn say they don't like automation on the platform. They also say that you're not supposed to reach out to anyone that you don't know on LinkedIn, yet they give you this tool that lets you connect with up to 200 people, and it's called Sales Navigator. So it's a bit strange and it is what it is. But ultimately, from my experience, using automation is pretty much essential. Like I've done it both manually and using automation, and your ROI is just completely destroyed when you don't use things like automation, because you spend so much, like 80% of the time, on things that are just really don't require any skill or thinking whatsoever. And so it's a vital part of this, and as well as actually optimizing your time on the manual processes as well. Where you want to put the effort is how you actually organize what to automate. So rather than saying, hey, this is my entire market and this is the only thing I'm going to message, break it down into, hey, this is a specific segment, this is another specific segment, this is the way I would message this person, this is the way I would message this people, and automate those. So put the effort into how you would segment and scale up what doesn't need any sort of manual input. So a few other things, like I said, don't use browser extensions, or just be careful with them. So I've seen them get picked up in the past. Make sure you use tools that have been around for a while. There's a lot of really sort of cheap options that sound really good, but can get picked up. So use tools that have been around and have a good reputation. A lot of them say they can do all the same things, but from experience, it's really the devil's in the detail. It's being able to use these tools reliably, and you sort of don't really know that until you get a feel for the tools. So like I said, I've been using Salesflow for a long time. Platforms like LinkedIn are constantly changing, and I know that they basically roll with the punches and they adapt really quickly. So you just need to make sure you use a tool that can do that. Tools that use their own IPs so that it can be set in a location that's close to you, and so that if you want to delegate other parts of the process, you can have people all running from that same IP, so it all looks like it's all coming from the same location. You also need to remove your pending invites. So if you have a lot of invites going out, you don't want to have like 20,000 pending invites. That's fairly indicative of automated behavior. You want a system that can withdraw the invites as it goes. I think most of them do. Once again, Salesflow is what we use, and it does it just as part of the process. You also want to make sure you keep your connection rate high. Don't send out, so when I say high, 20% is kind of an okay average. So try and do better than 20%. Not always possible depending on your target market, but do your best to try and keep it above 20%. Don't send more than 200 invites per week. To be honest, what will happen, in the past it was worse. If you sent too many messages, you'd get restricted, and then it'd be a pain in the butt to get things back up and running. I know this because I used to push the limits pretty hard on my own profiles, and the worst that ever happened was you got restricted and you might not be able to use the platform for a few weeks. We'd never seen anything happen with any of our own clients where we actually ran to the numbers, but at the moment what we're seeing is that you can send, once you get to your limit, let's say it's about 200 invites per week, you just can't send any more for the week, and then your quota refreshes the next week. And I'm talking specifically if you have a Sales Navigator subscription. So make sure you do have a Sales Navigator subscription. It lets you send more invites. LinkedIn is generally kinder to people that are giving it money. So basically it just means that you can send more invites, and ultimately you want to actually get as many invites out as you can. Also, having Sales Navigator lets you actually send connection messages as well, which can help improve your connection rate with the right connections too. So a few things I know, but all really important stuff in order to make sure that your LinkedIn account stays your LinkedIn account and you can keep using it. Like I said, LinkedIn used to be pretty strict with a lot of the restrictions. Lately, the only thing I've seen cause issues, if you're doing all this right, Well, nothing will cause issues if you do all this. The only thing I've ever seen happen recent times when it comes to restrictions and making sure you're following all this is if you're using an account that hasn't been used before or is very little engagement has ever been happened on it before, it's a brand new account and you start to get this volume up like really quickly, it just says it'll restrict the account until you verify it with a live ID like a passport or a license, and then it gets back up and running straight away. So long as you follow these guidelines, I haven't seen any issues, and you'll know that you're going to keep your account safe and secure and generating more revenue and more sales for your business. All right, so we've talked a lot about automation, but there's still a very manual part of this process. So let's talk a little bit about how to actually minimize your manual processes and make this as efficient as possible. When it is more processed out, it gives you the ability to delegate this process out as well, and you only need to step in for the parts that require you or not require you at all and just get someone else to manage it and book calls onto your calendar. That's what we do. All right, so we talked before about that initial part of the process where you're reaching out to people, you're getting the automation to send out those messages, and you waiting for basically the person to engage or reply with those messages. So this is where it really comes into a manual process. So what you want to do is use your CRM, whatever CRM that is, and we talked about spreadsheets, but it doesn't really matter what you do. If you have essentially your contact, we mentioned the things you want is to have the link to their profile, the status, and an action date. And I'll preface this with, we've been doing this for a very long time. We've built really complex processes and systems, and ultimately we keep coming back to keeping this super simple. Remember, simple becomes complex at scale, and there's no point in introducing complexity just for the sake of it. So ultimately, when someone replies on LinkedIn, that'll send information here, and what you want is that action to update the contact's status, and that will determine what you need to do next. So the status, I'd say there's really probably 4 key statuses or types of statuses that you want. The first one is reply, which means someone has replied on LinkedIn, whether they're a qualified prospect or not, someone has replied to your messages and you need to act on that, engage on that, and reply back to that. That's pretty straightforward. So no matter what you change that status to, if someone replies, it's going to update to a reply, and that's going to determine that you need to action it. Next one is high priority. And this is, once you have a conversation going, you might change it to a high priority. Now we also have here action date. Now by default, we'll actually send this plus 1 week, set this plus 1 week on the last engagement. However, if you're having a chat with someone, they say check back in next month, you might change that to obviously plus 30 days. And the way high priority works means that once the action date has been reached, it will tell you that you need to take an action. So reply tells you need to take an action, high priority tells you need to take an action. Low priority basically means it's not really worth putting more effort in. However, you may come back to them again in the future, or if that person replies or engages, in which case it'll update itself to a reply because that information will see it, update it to a reply. No action is really required at the action date. And the last one is basically stop. Not the right person, not interested in being contacted, just put it as a hard stop. So you can have different variations of these 4 categories, but ultimately you don't need, these are the 4, processes. That's really all you need. So you can have high priority, medium priority, which will still create the same actions at those dates, but ultimately they're just branches of that same type of status. High priority requires action at a certain date, reply requires action today, low priority doesn't unless the person responds, and stop just means stop. I know this probably sounds pretty simple or pretty basic, but people get so carried away and try to make this so much more complicated than it needs to be. The process doesn't need to be more complicated than, has that person replied? I will action it. Have they not replied? Okay, I will action it at the follow-up time set. That's as complicated as it needs to be. And we talked in the messaging video previously about how you follow people up, but this is really as complicated as the system needs to be. You just need to make sure you have a reliable automation system that will update this automatically for you. So you don't need to think, you just come in, you prioritize it by what actions need to be taken that day. Then when you have a good system like this, you can delegate this to a team member. They can access your LinkedIn account or your team's LinkedIn accounts through a specific IP address, and they can manage this process for you. You could even create a subset of reply that is, founder to check, and they can check all the new replies, clear out things that are irrelevant, answer replies that they have specific scripts for, and then you only need to get involved for things that actually need your direct input. All right, so lastly, I just want to finish on how you can go about capturing all this data, putting it into your CRM, and making sure it all updates automatically. So let's break this down, the process a little bit. So we got your LinkedIn account here, and this is really where everything's happening, all the actions happening. You've got people, you're reaching out to people, you're starting conversations, and it's a combination of both automation running that process for you and you managing conversations and potentially your team or helping you out and managing parts of the conversation you don't need. You can have a lot going on here, but essentially this is where all the action's happening. So let's say you got your automation tool, Salesflow and all those duck soup and all that, whatever. Not too worried about which one you use, just as long as it's safe and secure and works. So what happens is that automation platform's going on LinkedIn, it's taking actions, and it's looking at what's actually happening, and that information is then fed back to the platform. Things like date, things when invites, contact info, etc., etc. The writing's getting just more. These automation platforms make sure they have things called webhooks. So my technical description of these might be butchered a little bit, but basically what it means is that it captures that information and then it can send this webhook out, and then platforms like, so let's talk about this webhook, that sends these webhooks out, and then platforms like Zapier or make.com can capture that webhook and it feeds in information. So let's just say in Zapier. So Zapier has what's called Zaps, and make.com have what's called scenarios. And essentially what these are a series of rules based on an incoming action. So you might set up this webhook and these platforms here to say, when I receive this webhook, if it's a invite, if the status is invite, then add that invite to my CRM. Now your CRM can be as simple as a spreadsheet. It could be an actual, bona fide CRM platform like HubSpot, Go High Level, whatever. You just want to make sure that information is captured somewhere, and each contact has subsequent information added to it, just like on a spreadsheet. Now, you can basically say when you detect a contact has been invited, send that information here. So if you just add these things, so date invite sent, talked about this before, date connected, date withdrawn. If someone doesn't connect, you need to withdraw that message, and date of the last reply. That will then give you all of the information that you need in order to basically map out essentially your funnel from stranger all the way through to booked call or sale. So if you just add another couple of statuses, like that person's booked a call or that person's become a client of ours, then you can basically track all of the different steps in the process, which we'll be talking more about in the next video. And then you've got numbers around each of these different steps in the process, so you can actually troubleshoot and see where you might have constraints in your system and how you can go about actually improving those. So you really only need that information, but because this uses automation, you can also update this with all that contact information as well, the company, the industry, the campaign that it came from, and that's all gonna help make your life easier as well. But really, that's how the process works. Now, like I said, I haven't gone into sharing the screens and what's actually involved here because every platform's different. These platforms change all the time, and it probably is a bit more technical than what you actually need to know. This is a once-off thing that you set up once and it's done. So you'd be better off just going on platforms like Upwork. Just tell them that you need help basically connecting a webhook to your CRM or an automation platform to your CRM. You have webhooks, anyone who knows anything about automation will jump on that in a second and it'll be a piece of cake for them. All right, I hope you found that useful. Look, I know it's a lot to process. It can get a bit overwhelming and a lot of the details will change from tool to tool, but high level, hope you're starting to get the idea. You really want to automate what you can, delegate what doesn't require you, and only put your effort and actions in where it is absolutely required. So if you'd like to learn more about our services or explore potentially working with us, feel free to head to B2B Leads, book in a time with our team, see if we can actually help. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you in the next video.
All right, I hope you found that useful. As I mentioned at the start, there's a whole ton of other videos in this series. So if you're interested in checking them out, just click on the playlist that should be up on the screen right here.